In another video, a viewer wrote in a comment, "Okay, seriously, where is your noise?" And that brings up the topic of today, strategies to deal with noise. We all hate it, and it's everywhere. There's shot noise, read noise, thermal noise, walking noise. Noise in every shape, form, and color to keep you busy, entertained, and frustrated. So today, I thought I would bring forth a variety of strategies that I use to mitigate noise. Now, I'll tell you from the outset, this video is going to be very practical minded. This is not going to be an in-depth study of the various kinds of noise because there's a million videos like that floating around out there, and you can reference any one of those to learn about that. Instead, I'm going to address practical strategies to avoid giving noise an opportunity to even show up. Dealing with noise begins at the very beginning of astrophotography when you're first thinking about what telescope and camera that you want. That's right, it's not whatever the latest noise-killing application is. And it's not about what strategy that you use to shoot your images. It begins right when you pick your telescope and camera combination. Because the better the quality of your signal, the less noise will be an issue. They say SNR, signal-to-noise ratio. As signal gets higher, it drowns out noise. Well, a better quality signal also makes noise matter less. So an essential step in getting a better quality signal is to make sure that the pixel size of your camera sensor matches well with the focal length of your telescope. For this reason, I am much more a fan of using astro cameras with telescopes than I am of using DSLRs with lenses of various focal lengths. For the simple reason that it's easier to match a specific astro camera sensor to the focal length of a telescope. Now, that's not to say that a person cannot shoot good astrophotography with a DSLR. People have, of course, been doing that for a long time. And before the rise of modern digital astrophotography, that's what we were all doing. I mean, heck, I started doing this with chemical photography when I was just a kid. My first ever attempt at astrophotography was trying to use rubber bands to strap a Kodak camera onto a refractor telescope that my mother had bought for me. As I'm sure you can imagine, the outcomes were always garbage, but I was a kid and I was happy with them. Anyway, it's just a bit easier to match an astro camera to a telescope, and of course astro cameras are made with sensors and all the engineering specifically geared toward astrophotography. But that's a whole different topic. So I'm on the website astrotools.com here, and they have their very handy CCD calculator. Using this calculator, you can quickly and easily determine how well a match a camera and a telescope are for each other. On the bottom part of the page, there are a collection of drop-down menus where you can quickly specify your equipment and the calculator will do the rest. You can search the telescope drop-down menu or simply look through it to find your telescope. And if your telescope isn't listed there, then you can draw the specs from the manufacturer's website and record the telescope into the list. In the drop-down menu just below that, you can do the same thing with your camera. And in the drop-down menu below that, you can choose the seeing conditions you expect to encounter. Now, in the two middle drop-down lists, if your camera and telescope are known already in the list, when you enter them, the focal length and the CCD pixel size will automatically come up for you, though you might have to enter those if you're entering new equipment. And off to the right, you'll find a variety of Barlow and reducers to choose from, should you choose to use either of those when you are imaging. And lower right, you can specify if you plan to bin during your shooting. And at the very bottom of the page, you're going to see a bar with various colors, much like a spectrum on it, with a single black line running through that bar, showing graphically whether or not your camera and telescope are good matches for each other. And just above that, in a colored box, the color will change, by the way, according to whether or not your camera and telescope are good matches for each other. You'll get a small text message explaining also whether or not they are good matches and what you might have to anticipate doing to make them work well for each other. Now, the telescope shown is my Williams Optics Zenithstar 81mm Apo refractor and the Player One Uranus-C planetary camera that I keep paired to it. That telescope and camera essentially live together. They're now married and have a house of their own, and they come over to visit whenever I want to shoot astrophotography. But seriously, with that pairing, on a night of okay seeing, look at where that black bar is. It's pretty much at an ideal location on the pixel size to telescope focal length chart. Which means that on a night of average seeing, which is most clear good nights, and assuming my mount is functioning with average good accuracy, I should get perfectly sampled information. Now, if you look all the way at the drop-down menu on the right where it says Barlow Reducer, you can see that I've added the 0.8 reducer flattener for that telescope to the list. And then if you look at the very bottom, In the colored graph, you can see that the black bar is dead center of the green. The camera is still perfectly sampled for the telescope. Now I've changed some things around here on the list. I'm showing my Celestron Nexstar 8 SE compared to my Aries M. Well, if you look at the camera, it says that the camera is a ZWO ASI 533. And that's because the Player One Aries M does not exist on the list. Nobody's put it, including me. However, the sensor on the Player One Aries M is the same sensor on the ZWO ASI for 533, the Sony IMX 533 sensor. So we get the same specifications. Now you can see with this camera and telescope combination, we are slightly oversampled. We're about right between the green and the blue. However, oversampling these days is not a bad thing. In fact, you could say that oversampling, when used properly, even has some benefits. You just need to make it work for you. If we zoom in on the text message, it says, "This is the ideal pixel size for OK seeing." And in the line below, "This combination leads to slight oversampling, will require a good mount and careful guiding." Well, I have a good mount and I have a good guider, but even better, these days I shoot short subs. And typically, these days I shoot 60 seconds or less, sometimes 30 seconds, sometimes 10 seconds, sometimes 1 second. And very short subs make small guiding errors mean even less. And in such a case, a camera that is slightly oversampled can give you lots of detail, beautiful detail over time. And if you doubt that, just pop over to my Astro bin and take a look at the images, because everything shot since January 2024 has been with this camera and telescope combination, everything. So another essential step in getting that high quality signal is pairing your camera and telescope well. Typically, the more focal length, the bigger the pixel size you want in the sensors. And related to this is get a good camera, a good astro camera specifically. Ideally, something with a good modern sensor. Many cameras have Sony sensors these days, so in the Sony IMX 5XX range or higher. The reason being, these modern sensors have extremely good low read noise, and they have little to no amp glow. So you minimize the read noise and eliminate amp glow, and that's two more significant steps you've taken to improving the quality of your final signal. It goes without saying to shoot calibration frames as well. In the old days, we used to have to shoot dark frames and dark biases, and things were much more complicated. These days, I haven't bothered for ages with anything other than bias frames and flat frames, because with modern sensors, the other calibration frames are almost irrelevant. I shoot a new bias frame every 3 months, or if I switch telescopes and, take the SCT off and put the refractor on the mount. And I shoot flat frames every morning. Now, some persons say that you don't need to shoot flat frames every morning because your vignetting and such isn't going to change. You might only do it if you rotate your camera during the night. I'm going to disagree, because flat frames are also used to calibrate out things like dust. So unless you live in an area that's impervious to dust, one of the easiest steps you can take to improve the quality of the signal you're going to work with is just make sure that you have good flat frames in the morning to maximize the appearance of the previous night's signal. Now, some persons have told me that they find shooting flats to be something of a struggle that they try to avoid. The reason being due to a myth that flat frames should be shot at the same gain that the subs were shot with through the night. That is, in my practical experience, nonsense, to be frank. And I can demonstrate that. With whatever camera I'm using, I typically shoot my subs through the night at just a hair above whatever that camera's unity gain is. And it would be extremely difficult to impossible to shoot flats in the morning with that much gain. They would simply be overexposed because the camera cannot get a low enough shutter speed to get the proper exposure. So typically when I shoot my flats, I use 10 gain on all the filters, regardless of what my gain was through the night. And this works. The reason being that gain, or ISO, is a passive concept. Gain doesn't change the sensitivity of a modern digital camera to light. Digital camera sensors always have maximum sensitivity to light, and we primarily use shutter speed and aperture to control how much light the sensor registers. And thus, gain should not be confused with the ISO of chemical photography, which actually did represent the sensitivity of film to light. Among other things, this means when shooting flats, the concept of gain is not very relevant. But what gain is a deep topic to be covered in another video. But as long as you're shooting with a newer camera with a modern sensor, you really don't have to worry much about gain with flats. Ultimately, what matters the most, in consideration of maximizing the quality of your signal to mitigate noise, just be sure to frequently shoot good calibration frames. I would also recommend shooting lots of shorter subs. So if you used to be aiming for, 180 second, 300 second, 600 second subs, you can improve your images by shooting shorter subs. Generally, I shoot 60 seconds or less. The reason why relates to an extremely in-depth topic that's going to require a video or probably several videos in the near future. But in a nutshell, it works like this. You get as much signal from 61-second subs as you get from one 60-second sub. In the end, stacking simply averages together all of the signal from those individual subs, giving you a total image. Now, there are a couple advantages to shooting longer subs. Long subs manage read noise a bit better, and you can accumulate signal a bit faster. And this has to do with a variety of things, such as the brief pause it takes your computer to write an image to a hard drive. But long subs also have significant disadvantages, such as accumulating errors along the way. If high atmospheric turbulence leads to some brief aberrations in the quality of seeing, that's going to show up in the sub. If a satellite happens to track across that image, that will also show up in the sub. If a brief gust of wind causes the telescope to shake just a little bit, that will show up in a sub too. Now, if I were shooting a 5 to a 10-minute sub and something like that happened, and let's be frank, something like that is going to happen pretty frequently. That's 5 to 10 minutes of information that has to be discarded, and that's a lot of waste. On the other hand, if I was shooting, say, a 60-second sub, and one of those issues occurred, I'm only discarding 60 seconds worth of information. So let's say that 10 events like those that I just named occurred during the night, so I have to discard 10 of my subs. If I were shooting 5-minute subs, that's 50 minutes worth of information. And if I were shooting 10-minute subs, that's 100 minutes worth of information. However, if I'm only shooting 60-second subs and 10 events like that happens, I'm just discarding 10 minutes worth of information. So among other things, shooting shorter subs will mean that in the morning, when I have to go through my subs and select out those that had problems, I'm discarding a much lower percentage of information, much lower. This also means I can be much more aggressive in choosing which subs to keep, keeping only the very best, and that also is going to lead to improved signal quality. And that's just one small aspect of this. Let's say that my mount has some small errors in it. The fact is, every mount has some small errors in it. Even if you buy a $50,000 mount, there are going to be some small errors in it. If I shoot long subs, the mount movement errors are going to show through more clearly. But if I'm shooting very short subs, any errors in mount movements are going to be anywhere from greatly reduced to absolutely invisible. Now, every step in photography is a process of weighing this against that, and in the end, to me, the advantages of shorter subs outweigh those of longer subs. So, to improve my signal even further, I stick with short subs. In general these days, my subs are around 60 seconds. To improve your signal, it also helps to match your targets to the shooting conditions. For example, if there are lots of fast-moving clouds, shoot bright targets. They don't need much integration time, so you get an opportunity to shoot something that's going to come out well in the brief amount of time that you might have between intervening clouds. For example, this image of the Orion Nebula represents only 16.33 minutes of integration time. And if you're dealing with a night with a lot of moonlight, it's a great opportunity to shoot star clusters or planets or the moon itself. Stars work well on such nights because stars are bright against dark backgrounds. It's easier to handle adjusting the gradients. Planets are both bright and small, unless you're hunting for the mysterious Planet 9. And the moon itself makes an interesting target. If you have a telescope with some good focal length, experiment. Put a Barlow lens or two on there, and see if you can spot some little green men eating moon cheese. The point is, in all photography everywhere, you either have to pick a target that matches the shooting conditions, or make the shooting conditions match the target. In astrophotography, we cannot control the shooting conditions, but you can control your targets, and to improve your signal even further, make sure you're shooting the right target for the right conditions. Before you even begin developing though, it is important to be sure that you are working with only the best information. Thus, an aggressive call of the subs you have acquired is really essential. I know it's painful to give up subs, that's lost integration time, but believe me, your images will come out better with less integration time but higher quality subs. Here's a case in point. This is an image of the Cat's Eye Nebula that I shot before doing an aggressive calling of the subs. I had done a little bit of a calling. I removed any images in which it looked like there might have been traces of clouds or satellite or airplanes streaking across the image. But here's an image of the Cat's Eye Nebula where I had done a very aggressive calling of the subs. You see, on one night that I shot it was moonless and crystal clear, but the seeing was terrible, so in the end, I called almost 60% of the subs after counting what the subframe selector removed and what I chose to remove after a visual inspection. Some persons have pointed out that if I'm shooting very short subs of 60 seconds, 30 seconds, 5 or 10 seconds, I end up with hundreds or even thousands of subs in the morning. So how on earth do I do a visual inspection? Well, I do not use PixInsight's Blink. I don't know how that truly horrible tool became popular to use for culling subs. It's strange and tedious trying to use the tool just to call a few dozen subs. Trying to use it to do hundreds or thousands would honestly probably put me in an insane asylum. What I do is remove them with OrphanView. With OrphanView, I can just zip right through all the subs. If I see one I don't like, hit the delete button, and it's gone. OrphanView removes it right out of the folder for me. So the whole process is fast and easy, and OrphanView reads FITS files just fine. Now, I know Blink is also used to create videos of very short images, but to be honest, I wouldn't touch Blink with a 10-foot pole even to do that. It just frankly is an awkward and poor tool. If I wanted to create a video of something that I was filming through my telescope, let's say as an example, the stars moving across the sky as Earth rotates, I would shoot my footage, whether that was just a bunch of very, very short JPEGs or something like an AV file, and then I would simply drag that file into a video editor like DaVinci Resolve, which you can get online for free, and which gives you almost infinitely more power for editing and controlling the images without all the strange awkwardness of Blink. So if you're a fan of Blink, don't take that personally, use it if you like, but for doing a visual calling of subs, a tool like OrphanView is going to do you a lot better. When doing a visual calling, mostly look for things like satellite and airplane streaks, and obvious cloud cover within an image. And if you only have a very few subs to work with, you might be done with a visual inspection. Back in the days when I was shooting 5 and 10 minute subs, I would get very good results just with careful visual inspection. I could take the time to take a few minutes examining any questionable sub. But these days, now that on mornings after clear nights I end up with hundreds or even thousands of subs that have to be inspected, after a quick cursory examination with OrphanView, I then use the subframe selector. Now, the use of the subframe selector is a whole and deep topic unto itself, so I'm not going to go into it at length here. There are a number of good videos that exist on it already on YouTube, and I'll cover it more in depth later as well. But I have a routine using 4 parameters that I apply to the subframe selector that gives me reliably good results every time. I examine my subs for the number of stars available, the FWHM, eccentricity, and the median of each sub. The subframe selector is accurate and quick, and even if I am examining several thousand subs, it only takes a few minutes to blow through them with the subframe selector. And of course, if I'm doing lucky imaging, where I can end up with tens of thousands of subs in the morning, then the subframe selector is the tool for that job. I might be radical about doing good astrophotography, but even I'm not going to try to visually inspect 10 to 20,000 images. In terms of developing, I have found some steps go a long way toward improving the final image quality. And these steps don't always strictly match what the manuals are telling you to do. If you're shooting with a one-shot color camera, I have found that what I call the aesthetic development protocol tends to go a long way toward improving image quality. So with a one-shot color camera, once you have your final master from stacking, try to work with it like this. Clone the original master. Apply the screen transfer function to the clone. This will bring up its brightness. Then open the blur exterminator. Set it for correct mode only. Run the blur exterminator on the cloned image. Then reset the blur exterminator so it's on the default mode and run the default blur exterminator again on the cloned image. Then run the noise exterminator on the cloned image. Then open the star exterminator. Set the star exterminator for the best AI. That is the option that does not also list light and no noise in its description. Make sure that generate star image is selected, and you may or may not choose to run large overlap depending on the image conditions. And then run star exterminator. Now you have your star plate. Transfer the screen transfer function histogram stretch over to your histogram tool and use the histogram tool to lock in that histogram stretch on your star plate. Then save the star plate as a lossless TIFF to be reintroduced into the final image later. You can now close the original cloned image, but be sure to keep your star plate. Now let's go back to the original image. First of all, run the star exterminator. This time you can click off the Generate Star Image box, as you will not need the star image that's produced by this action. You just want to remove the stars from the image. Then I suggest you run the histogram tool and stretch your histogram. You can, if you want, to apply the histogram stretching theory that I covered in my video, Perfect Histograms in 60 Seconds, to this task, and you'll find that you will get perfect, flat, nonlinear data that's ready for the next step, the curves transformation. Open your Curves tool, transform your curves to bring out the best of the image, and then run the Noise Exterminator to clean it up, and then open Blur Exterminator, reset it to make sure it's at default, slide the Sharpen Star slider all the way to the left to 0.0, and then run the Blur Exterminator. This will sharpen up your image nicely, and what is sharpened up has the noise cleaned up within it. Now, if you pick up some color artifacts here, the color artifacts are usually because the Sharpen Non-Stellar Structure slider is too high, so move it down and then try rerunning the Blur Exterminator. You can also try running it on the luminance only option. Sometimes that'll help even more. It depends on the object. When you're done, save the starless plates as a lossless TIFF and export to your layer-based photo editor, such as Affinity Photo or Photoshop. And there, open your starless image and then drag the star layer over it. Set the star layer for a screen composite mode, or blend mode as it's known in Affinity Photo, and the stars will be added to your image. With OSCs, this will give you a pretty good image out of PixInsight. It's still going to need developing, but you'll get the best possible image, I think, out of PixInsight. And once in the layer-based photo editor, there are other techniques that you can add to this process as well to continue to improve the quality of the image. Using the Orton technique on images with a fairly weak signal, applying blend modes such as a soft light blend mode, enhances the apparent signal within brighter regions, which improves detail and color, while increasing contrast in the darkest regions, which helps to drag down noise, or a strategic application of the Gaussian blur filter to an image to fundamentally blur out either noise or simply undesirable characteristics of an image, like light worms, a concept we'll discuss in a couple weeks. Now, this is a different image of the M106 Galaxy. When I'm done with almost all the developing, I will zoom way in and take a close look at the structure and the stars. See this fuzz or haze around the structure? This will make your image softer, and generally it's undesirable. So if I see that in the image, at the end of the layer-based processing, I will export the image back into PixInsight and run the Noise Exterminator again. And most times, that will nicely clean it up, like here. This also improves noise in space. And to preserve the quality of your image when exporting, use a lossless TIFF format. Also avoid compressing the file. Compression will lead to the gradual loss of information. Now let's look again at this process, but this time using monodata. With monodata, we're going to have to go about things a little bit differently. With monodata, you're not going to be able to follow through the aesthetic development protocol really. That really only works with images from one-shot color cameras. Begin by opening the Blur Exterminator, setting it to the correct only mode, and running that on each of the separate L, R, G, and B channels. And then reset the Blur Exterminator and run the default mode again on each of the L, R, G, and B channels. This will correct and deconvolve the stars and sharpen up the total image. Then, using the L channel as your reference, run Star Align and align the RGB channels to the luminance channel so that they align better, and then combine the linear RGB channels. The color will probably need to be adjusted at this point, so run the image solver and then use SPCC in general, not always, but usually that works best. Use SPCC to correct the color of the RGB channels. I also recommend that you color balance by using the linear fit tool and do a separate combination of the RGB channels with the linear fit, because while SPCC usually does a great job, not always, sometimes there's some errors, sometimes you don't get color that you're happy with. Sometimes SPCC leaves some artifacts, and the linear fit can help correct when those things happen. But how to do that and use that is another topic for another video. So with your SPCC RGB sub, go ahead and then run a histogram stretch on it using the histogram theory from my video, Perfect Histograms in 60 Seconds. This will give you a nice flat RGB channel to work with later. Then apply the histogram stretching tool using the same theory to the luminance channel, and then using the LRGB combination tool, combine the luminance channel with the RGB channel. Now, run Noise Exterminator on the image for the first time. I find this method is very reliable for coming out with an initial image for developing that is already of very high quality. From there, you'll have to take other steps to address image quality and noise as developing continues. Now, it will become very apparent at this stage of processing that you have to have collected enough photons. There just is no substitute for collecting enough light. So whether you used a long exposure strategy or a short exposure strategy, if you don't have enough integration time, you're going to get noise. And even if you can eliminate the noise, or what is technically noise, and often you can, you're still going to end up with weak images with soft definition. Because in the end, there is no getting around the need for strength of signal. Let's take a moment and talk about dithering. Dithering is a technique in which the mount is told to move just a few pixels every few frames so that a certain percentage of your pixels are a little bit and randomly off from the other pixels. Dithering is especially useful at addressing pattern noise, which is introduced by small inaccuracies in the mount, and may relate to little but important things such as keeping up with the rotation of the Earth, or flexure between your guide scope and telescope. And even OAG telescope combinations are not immune to this. Pattern noise can come up in small errors between them as well. Such pattern noise often looks like streaks in your image called walking noise, and it is extremely difficult, almost impossible to remove, except for dithering. Dithering does a great job removing pattern noise and walking noise in general. Now, dithering is a topic that in and of itself could occupy one or potentially several videos, and that's just how dithering addresses noise. So I'm not going to go too deeply into it here. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, the purpose of this video is to be very practical and just talk about strategies you can use to improve your signal quality, which combats noise overall. So the message here ultimately is dither. Learn how to calculate an appropriate amount of pixels worth of dither. How much dithering you do depends on your telescope and camera versus your guide scope and camera combination, or your telescope and camera versus your OAG and camera combination. But dithering makes an enormous improvement in your final signal quality. Also, to improve your overall signal quality, I suggest drizzling, ×2 for non-stellar subjects and ×1 for stellar subjects. So, let's imagine that you're going to drizzle an image of a nebula. In your stacking, drizzle it ×1 and ×2. You might have to stack twice, and I know that takes time, but that'll maximize the quality of your image. Drizzling ×1 is going to give you better stars, and drizzling ×2 will give you a better DSO. Later, you can recombine your drizzle ×1 star plate with your non-stellar drizzle ×2 plate when you get into the final phases of editing, ideally in a layer-based non-destructive photo editor such as Affinity Photo or Photoshop. While what exactly drizzling does with noise is somewhat debatable, in repeated testing I have found that drizzling almost always improves the quality of the information. And I recently posted several videos where I showed those experiments and outcomes. To see the first one, look up my video, To Drizzle or Not to Drizzle. Now there's one topic I haven't covered yet, but it is important to consider. The darker your skies, the better your image. Narrowband filters go a long way toward helping us, and I do not, nor have I ever lived in areas of high light pollution, so I cannot speak with any expertise on managing light pollution. But I do know that light pollution creates shot noise in images even when you're shooting through narrowband filters. And shot noise is a big deal, so ultimately the darker your skies, the better the images you're going to get. And if you're shooting in a region with good dark skies, you can either shoot with a one-shot color camera using only a UV IR cut filter, or you can shoot with a mono camera using LRGB filters. And that will greatly increase the amount of photons that are able to get to your camera, which is going to drive up your SNR faster. And I don't know a way around that dilemma. In the end, the darker your skies, the better your image quality. That's why NASA and ESA and others put up orbital telescopes and build observatories on top of mountains and in other dark sky regions. So, if and when possible, get out to a dark sky site. If you get a chance to do a little astrophotography, you'll be glad you did. To sum up, what I am saying here is that the best way to deal with noise is through the application of a comprehensive strategy to improve the quality of your signal every step of the way. And I'm not just referring to increasing your SNR. What I mean is improving the fundamental quality of the signal that you're going to work with. Shooting with equipment and in times and locations that allow you to get the best signal, aggressively choosing only the sharpest subs, and using strategies that will effectively minimize the appearance of flaws within subs. And then strategically applying developing techniques that further improve the quality of your signal and final image, and which repeatedly mitigate any appearance of noise throughout the entire developing process are the best ways that I know of to defend against the varying forms of chaos that ultimately are the essence of noise. I hope that helps. Let me know if you have any questions in the comment section, and please take a moment to like and subscribe. Now, get out there and shoot the sky.